Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So in the previous session, we have heard from businesses, and now it's time to hear from another very crucial actor, which is civil society. So our next session is on empowering local, enabling progress, civil societies driving the localization agenda for the SDGs. Our co-host for this session is Korea NGO Council for Overseas Development Cooperation. So now we're going to discuss how locally led action can contribute to the progress of the achievement to the SDGs. So I'm going to introduce you to our next moderator of this session, Tae-sik Cho, Secretary General of the Korea NGO Council for Overseas Development Cooperation. Mr. Cho, welcome. The stage is yours.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the CSO Forum. The topic of this session is empowering local and the importance of localization. And the reason why we decided to go for this topic is that recently, when you look at international cooperation for development and humanitarian assistance, you may understand that localization has been a key word and a key issue. Personally, I recently participated several meetings in USAR and UN Orchard and other international organizations meetings, and for the past couple of years, what we have been discussing as top priority agenda issue is a localization, how we can promote locally led SDG initiatives. So that is why we decided to deal with this topic in this session. Then we need to think about the reasons why localization has become important. And in short, I like to argue that the agents of change have been shifted, or the agents of development have changed. In the past, these were mainly provided by the donor countries, but now there is a shift within the recipient countries, a shift from the public sector to the private sector and from the public sector to local community members. So this means that local community members have become important agents for change and development. And I believe that empowering local residents is all about localizing SDGs. This session is about civil society organizations. As for NGOs, we have staff members who are on the ground, who are there on the field with the local community members. So we have been promoting localization and local action. And I believe that is why this theme is very appropriate for CSOs to discuss. And to deal with this topic, we have invited a wonderful panel of 3 experts. They are experts on international development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. We have 3 main organizations in Korea, and they are representing them. First of all, we have Jun Oh, board chair of the Save the Children Korea. And we have CEO Young-gi Hwang of Child Fund Korea. And from Good Neighbors International, we have Secretary General Jong-gun Kim. We are going to focus our discussions on 2 key questions. First of all, we are going to discuss the importance of localization. We have the common goals of the SDGs, and in achieving the SDGs, we need to utilize localization. What's the relationship between localization and the SDGs? That's the first question. And the second question is to share with us your specific cases and projects that each of your organizations have carried out. As for the first question, I'd like to ask this to Mr. Oh from Save the Children Korea.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Well, the topic today, localization. So as our moderator just talked about, localization is an important topic for international development cooperation. If you look at the history of the international development cooperation, many concepts were developed by OECDs. And for example, 2005, Paris Principles, and in 2008, Accra Declaration, and in Busan later, the principles, Busan Principles. So the ownership became the number one principle. So ownership, sense of ownership, as moderator mentioned. So you cannot just be arbitrary. You have to think about the priorities of the recipient countries. So localization is a more recent term, and localization is more comprehensive in its meaning than ownership. So in the past, of course, the meaning of the past ownership concept is included, but SDGs and global norms about SDGs, they need to be localized, more custom tailored to the local need. So that is also the meaning of localization. So localization is more comprehensive and complex. In Korea, as we conduct many ODA programs, I'm afraid that we have not sufficiently localized our programs. There's a reason for that. I believe that it is because we also need to focus on ownership in a way, meaning that we need to think about the local government, local community, local NGOs, local actors. So we need to engage them more. We need to listen to them more. And also, we should not focus too much on what we want to provide. For example, just because we are an IT powerhouse, let me help you with our IT prowess. No, we shouldn't take that kind of approach. From the very planning stage, we have to invite the local actors to plan the program that we want to provide to them. So again, many Korean programs are not sufficiently localized. But if you look at the US or Europe, they offer much more localized programs. Then they still have their own issues. For example, so this is kind of dilemma. Okay, so it's good to have localization, but then who is local? Are you talking about the local government or local NGOs? Particularly in a dictatorship country, could be different. So local by local, who do you mean? And also, in a global sense, development cooperation agenda or norms, we need to apply them in a way befitting the local need. And also nowadays, we talk about not just economic development, but social development as well. So we need to reflect the social values as well. SDG, for example, talks about gender equality. So then if we want to apply gender equality in the context of an African country, if this is not accepted by the local government or local community, how can we localize this? So localization is complex in that regard. Thank you very much.
지금
Thank you for your remarks. What Mr. O just mentioned is quite important. When we think about localization, it is translated as 현지화 in Korean. So there are several expressions of translating the concept of localization. It's not just a matter of translation, but the definition of localization is not clear. We haven't really reached a consensus on what localization actually means. And in Korea, we talk more about the sense of ownership. And in the Western world, they put more emphasis on social values. So there seems to be some difference in terms of the concept and the definition of localization. Let's move on to Mr. Hwang from Child Fund Korea. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to be part of this panel. These days, localization is a hot topic, so I'm very happy that we can discuss this important topic. As I just heard from Mr. O, we need to think about whether localization means a localization from the perspective of the government or from the perspective of the CSOs or the local community. In my view, I believe that localization has to be, it means that a project is carried out with the needs of local institutional organization as first. Different countries have different capabilities when it comes to responding to climate change or larger challenges. So for such global challenges, we may not really be able to apply the concept of localization. But when it comes to providing sanitation service or early childhood care, and other projects that we are carrying out, we need to let local organizations lead these projects. So my sense of localization is rather narrowly defined. So to make this happen, to have this narrower scope of localization, we need to have a clear scope. We need to have a clear set of goals. Why do we need localization? This is quite obvious. As you studied in the past, if you have to memorize something, then you will not really understand that. But if you are motivated to learn, then you will be able to continue your learning and you will be able to remember things. Likewise, if a project is designed and led by a local organization, this can be sustainable. So it is going to be crucial for the SDGs as well. And we need to take a long-term perspective in terms of localization. So first of all, we need to carry out a project based on the local needs. Whatever they need, we can design and carry out a project, as Mr. O mentioned. Also, in the process of implementation, project implementation, local members need to participate. And our goals or objectives should not be short-term, but long-term, so that we can produce sustainable results. And as for NGOs that provide services and goods, we need to have more interactions with the local counterparts. And what I learned from our experiences at Child Fund Korea is that it is number one priority to build capacity of local staff. When we go to Bangladesh or Malawi or Sudan, in these developing countries, there are some competent local organizations, but they are not really good at doing accounting or making reports. They are not really able to produce documents to the level that is required by KOICA or other donor organizations. They should build their capacity and capabilities to design and implement the project and create a report and do accounting. So the entire process should be handled by the local organization, but it's not easy because their capabilities are lagging. So we need to build capacity for them as we go through the localization process. NGOs like us, we need to focus on strengthening the capacity of the local staff members, be it the head or the CSO or in other position. We can send them to Korea or to a nearby country to learn, to train them so that they can build and strengthen their capacity. And this is a long-term process. Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. Mr. Hwang talks about the definition and the scope of localization, and it resonates with me. As I was listening to him, I thought about how in the educational sector, there is a shift from rote memorization to self-motivated learning. And so I believe that this shift to localization is similar to that shift from rote memorization to self-motivated learning. And he talked about capacity building of local staff members. Globally, power shift is a critical concept. So a shift of financial resources, the shift of power in decision making, and the third shift is shifting of capacity and capacity building. So in that sense, Child Fund Korea is already working on the third pillar as well. And as far as I know, the foundation, this Child Fund Korea, is actually very successful in their localization endeavor. So Mr. Huang, you can later comment on that. Yes, as for specific cases, yes, I'm going to elaborate more on that. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Let's move on to good neighbors. We have with us Jonggun Kim.
예, 앞서서 두 분께서
Yes, two panelists talked about localization from the SDGs perspective. So I'd like to talk about something else about localization. So what kind of policy we have at Good Neighbors International in terms of localization, and what kind of policies we are implementing. So localization policies that we have can be talked about in three big areas. First, the project implementation. We want to localize that. To that end, we organized local residents. That is a requirement. And a local residential committee. So that committee is actually set through vote by the local residents. So through democratic vote, the local residents, they select their representatives. And these representatives or a representative, we call that local residence committee. So through this local resident committee, we collect ideas about local engagement, and also we listen to the local residents' voices. So this is what we do before we implement our project. So we have about 208 project sites around the world, and so for all these 208 projects, we have 208 local resident committees. They're responsible for identifying project ideas. And in terms of project progress, they also actively participate, and they speak out, they voice their opinions, and they participate in the project implementation. So as two panelists talked about, the local engagement is really ensured through this channel of a local resident committee. And second area is about governance. We want to localize governance. To do that, we set up local leadership. So Good Neighbors work in about 51 countries, out of which 16 countries we set up local leadership. So about 30% of the countries we operate in, we work with a local leadership that we set up. And our immediate goal is to increase this ratio of local leadership to 60% of all countries we operate in. 100% is not easy to achieve right now. And also per continent, for example, there's a ratio about 6:4. So we believe that this is a good structure. So local leadership, if a given country has a local leadership setup, then we use the local leadership to work with the local community and also fundraising as well. Local leadership, they are really exercising truly leadership in raising the fund for the project. Good example is Tajikistan. And out of their total budget, 30% locally, they raise the fund either through global fundraising campaign or domestic fundraising campaign. And third area of localization policy, we want to localize core competent human resources, for example, technical manager. So in the case of short-term project, So so far we dispatched Korean people to the project site, but the mid-level managers, we want to have a local person as a key man, as a middle-level manager, and a Korean technical manager, for example. So Korean technical manager is dispatched to the project site only for a few months of the year. And project management overall, the decision making is done by the local PM. And technical manager from Korea will provide technical assistance and administrative assistance and also communication with the donor. So that's what the technical manager does. So if there is so we have mid-level local managers. So they really function as local leaders, and we want to develop them in their leadership capacity. So those are the three main areas where we want to implement the localization of our policy.
김
Thank you very much. Mr. Kim mentioned is three aspects of localization. Having a residential committee and a governance structure. When it comes to businesses, governance is about the ownership structure, and in the government, governance refers to the decision-making process and the structure. And among the NGOs and the CSOs, I believe it's in the same context that governance and localization, this is about decision-making and fundraising and capacity building. So all these elements, all these aspects are all related. And the three panel members already covered some key concepts. Let's move on to the second question. Mr. Huang, I'd like to invite you to first talk about the specific examples of Child Fund Korea, how you are applying the concept of localization. Well, Mr. Cho, the moderator, has invited these three organizations with an intention. I believe there's an intention. The Save the Children is actually a leading organization that started child welfare for the first time in Korea. And Good Neighbors has about 30 years of history in Korea, started as a local NGO, and it became a global organization with offices in more than 50 countries, and it has more than 200 project sites. So this is a wonderful achievement. It is indeed a legendary organization. As for Child Fund, it has a different type of legend, so to speak. I believe we are the living example of localization. In 1948, when the Korean government was established, there was the Christian Child Fund in the U.S., and they came to Korea to start to help children. And after the Korean War, we had many orphans, war orphans. So this organization provided support and assistance for these children. And in this process, the CCF thought that they would have to localize these campaigns and projects. So in 1976, we had missionaries of CCF from the U.S., the management, and at that time, they gathered the leaders of the Korean organization, and they said, okay, we will give you 10 years. Please strengthen and build your capacities so that we can hand over all these works to the hands of Korean leaders. So since 1976 to 1986, for 10 years, a lot of efforts were made and a lot of trainings were done. So in the past, all these projects were led by foreigners, but in the meantime, there was a lot of transition and empowerment of the local leadership. So now the local leadership even secured a building. And so in 1986, the new organization was established under a different name. We changed our name after that as well, but as a social organization, we were able to grow this, and then we became a member of the Child Fund Alliance, and that is why we're now able to conduct a lot of projects overseas. So now we're part of this global alliance. And we have history of 76 years. We have Mr. Kim sitting in the audience, and he was the one who documented the 60 years of history several years ago. And so I believe that our foundation is a living example of localization. To be successful in localization, you need a mission, and you need to nurture local staff, and you need to give them time to prepare. And you also need to hand over the entire authority completely to the local leadership. And then the independent operation will continue afterwards. So if you go through this journey, this process, you will know what you need to do, whether it be Vietnam or Bangladesh or other countries. We have these local NGOs in these developing countries, and if we can nurture them and if we can localize them, this will be great. When we carry out overseas projects, we go to these different countries for regional development or childcare programs or digital education project. So there are many different projects, and depending on the nature of the project, we have different partner organization in the local community. And it is desirable that they strengthen their capacities and they're able to raise funds and they're able to operate these projects on their own. And to make that happen is our ultimate goal. I don't know whether it will take 20 years or 30 years, but in the future, we will be able to delegate a lot to the local organizations. We will and just be a fundraising organization that sponsors these projects that are led and implemented by the local organizations. I believe this may be the future that the SDGs envision. If the SDGs are successfully implemented, then I imagine that overseas projects which were done by the global NGOs will be able to be done by the local NGOs with strengthened capacities and capabilities. And then global NGOs can step back and they provide funding. It will be partial funding because local fundraising will also be possible. And so that is the kind of a long-term direction that we need to take. And in that process, we will have to apply global standards. So 25% of the budget that we provide can be spent by the local staff in a discretionary manner. And going down the road, most of the funds will be raised locally. And what we can do is to provide additional funding. And they can sometimes come to our organization or to COICA or the KCOC to get some assistance, and then we can provide assistance as needed. So that is the kind of future that we can imagine. But what I am a little concerned about is whether local NGOs in developing countries and less developed countries will be able to reach that level. The U.S. Charity gave us the baton and gave us the authority to independently operate our program because we were able to do so. But I wonder whether that can happen in developing countries or less developed countries. So I have some doubt, but if that's the long-term direction that we need to go, we need to put our effort in that. Thank you. As I was listening to Mr. Huang, I thought about Severance Hospital that is located right next to this building. It has about 70 or 80 years of history, and in the past, just like the Child Fund Korea, back then we had many Western missionaries that came to Korea. And at that time, Korea was not an advanced country, but then I believe they took the risk and took the chance and delegated a lot of authority to us. And as for severance also, there was no medical education in Korea. We didn't have competent doctors, but then after providing education at the severance, they handed over to the Koreans right away. So it reminded me of the history of severance. So Child Fund Korea, I believe it is a really good example, and it is a model that we can be proud of. So thank you for sharing your story with us. Next. It may be a different case in nature. I believe this is another good example. About 30 years ago, 8 people started as volunteers, but after 30 years, they have more than 4,000 employees, and they're doing a lot of things in Korea and overseas. And this is another success case, another legendary case, which is Good Neighbors. So in that sense, what are your actual practices and the history of Good Neighbors you can share with us? This is going to be very inspiring as well, and it fits well with the topic of the session. This was not a prepared question, but Mr. Kim, I'd like to ask you to talk about that as well.
예, 이제 우리 이 두 분께서
Yes, the two panelists who talked about talked from really big framework, and I want to give you more example. I prepared an example, a specific project as an example, but now I get asked about our history and management. So in our case, when we started, our motivation was really clear. So Korea used to be a recipient country, but now donor country. So that was a big motivation for us. That's where we began. So with that understanding, with that sense in mind, and as Korea went through the change from recipient country to donor country, and our founding father, so to speak, they already experienced development projects at other international organizations. As Mr. Hwang talked about, we have our experiences as a recipient country. So when we were recipient country, already our founding members had the experience of running the projects and running this kind of organization. So we have the experience of growing the organization and conducting projects and based on that history, we also came up with our principles in terms of implementing projects and working with the local community. So because of our past experience and history, we had some ideas as to how to go about conducting our own programs. Again, autonomy is very important and respect is very important. So our founding members, as they were conducting projects in Korea first as a recipient country, they already experienced the importance of autonomy and respect. So because they also used to be a recipient country, so as they go about conducting projects at local sites, they know it is important to respect the local community. That is also why we decided to form a local residential committee, for example. So it might sound simple, but basically it talks about really going inside the local community and talking with them, having conversation with them, and getting them to talk about their problems to us, and getting them to generate their ideas about how to deal with their problems. This whole process is not easy, but sometimes we can do it within just a few months. But sometimes this whole process takes up 2 years and more, and still not enough a result. But because we decided on this principle, we still prioritize entering the local community, and if we do not form a local resident committee, then we do not implement the project, because we believe that we need to really get the understanding from the local community about the project, and we also want to respect them as well. So on all our project sites, we have such local resident committee, and we also emphasize this because of our own experiences. And also for governance, this local committee and the local representatives on this committee, we want them to participate in governing the project, and we want them to become the highest decision makers ultimately. So we want to grow them in that capacity as well. And this is really important to us. Again, autonomy and respect is really important for us.
Thank you very much. I asked you an unprepared question impromptu, but thank you for your wonderful remarks. As I said, I participated in several meetings, and when the topic was localization, the KCOC is the Korean NGO Council for Overseas Development Cooperation. So it is a council of NGOs. We have about 140 members. So of these member organizations, I would like to argue that this organization has been the leader in localization, which is Save the Children. They have the 5-step or 5 strategies for localization. And they have 7 dimensions to localization. So they have the most systematic approach to localization. So I'd like to learn more about how Save the Children Korea is implementing localization in actual cases. So Mr. Oh, can you please answer?
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Well, in my earlier remarks, localization is used in 2 major ways. One, in the past, we talked about local ownership. So we need to let the local actors to take more active role. So it's not so the donor country should not just do everything arbitrarily. And second sense is the global development goal or global development norms need to be more localized to the local conditions. So these are 2 main meanings of localization. But the problem is these 2 meanings, they conflict with each other. So in the past, I used to serve as a board member at the Save the Children globally. Back then, there was a Taliban government in Afghanistan. So there were many problems, a lot of really oppressive measures against women. For example, they banned girl students from attending school. So Save the Children Global They called an online board meeting. I participated in that online board meeting as well. We talked about what to do. Some board members, they answered that, okay, if they allow only boy students to go to school, then maybe we still continue to work with the boy students. We should, but my perspective is that Save the Children is the organization that came up with children's right. Here, children's rights are severely violated by the Taliban government, and we cannot just keep going on just as if nothing's happening to children's rights in Afghanistan. So we need to really hold the ground, and we need to let them know that if you keep violating children's rights like this, we cannot offer these programs to you. So that's kind of one example, one story. But I want to talk about more positive story as well. So I also visited Dhaka, Bangladesh. In Dhaka, the Save Children works with a local NGO for urban slum area. So there is a project going on in urban slum. The project began in 2013, so the project has been going on for 10 years. During the pilot stage, the local NGO we let the local NGO to fully understand children's rights. So we did some initial work with the local NGOs. So at this stage, we are not implementing the project yet. We are just getting to know each other. Save the Children and the local NGOs are working together to get to know each other and to help the local NGO to fully understand children's rights. And after that, we implemented a project. This is really going very well. So about $4.5 million budget, and we provide education to many children there. This is a really great example in Bangladesh. And another example, about 4 or 5 years ago, I went to visit Nepal. And in Nepal, so in the second example that I talked about earlier, the second meaning of localization I talked about, global development norms need to be localized. So this is a good example of that. In Nepal, our partner NGO, so, there is a child marriage problem. And actually, if you're under 18 years, then you are not allowed to get married because under 18 years old is the definition of children. But you can still marry if you're a child, depending on the country. And child marriage is actually quite common in some countries. So those countries, they need to change their rules. But some countries, they do not change their rules. In our country, girls at 16 age, they have been always married, so we cannot ban that. So in that case, how can we localize the global norm that we ban child marriage? So in that case, our local NGO in Nepal was very active. So they carried out a campaign to say no to child marriage throughout Nepal. So they also raised the awareness that we need to change the law to prohibit girls under the age of 18 to get married. And that was a really actually great success case.
Thank you very much. In the case of Save the Children, I believe they have made quite a lot of progress in terms of they have finished conceptualizing localization and they've been taking action. So the grand bargaining and localization emerged not too long ago. But since 2016, Save the Children defined the localization, and they have 7 dimensions and they have 5 steps in the localization strategy, and that is why such success cases were possible. So I can see that they are way ahead. We have about 20 minutes left. I would like to ask each panel members additional question. We had a prior meeting conversation, and I thought 2 rounds of discussions would be enough to fill up an hour, but the panel members were quite brief in their responses, and I thought interactions would be important, and their answers were much more brief than what I anticipated. So I'd like to ask you another question. I believe this is a very interesting question. Mr. Oh, in his initial remarks, he said that Korea is lagging behind in terms of discussing localization and implementing localization. Not very lagging behind, but somewhat lagging behind. Okay. Now, we have many NGOs and what they understand as localization and the government's understanding of localization seem to be quite different. There seems to be a gap of understanding between the two. As for private NGOs, they have deepened their understanding of localization, but the government is not there yet. So even though we pursue these projects, we need to work with the government, and there should be more alignment between the two to make progress in localization. So in your activities, you may have run into some obstacles or challenges, and you may have some recommendations for the government as to what they need to do. So can you share with us?
제 생각에는 이제
In my opinion, the concept of localization still, I think we often talk about the public ODA programs by the government rather than NGOs, because other than the government agencies, there are not that many like pure NGOs in Korea who are able to go out and conduct programs with the other countries. So NGOs, and also when they go overseas, they have no choice but to work with the local NGOs. So for NGOs, like NGOs in Korea, they're already used to localization to a certain degree. But if you look at the Korean government, and Korean government is more focused on working for Korea's interest. I also used to work at government, so I understand that. So when the government conducts ODA programs, we were talking about planting the pole of our national flag on overseas soil. So we would talk about, this program is to help our national interest. That is why we are going overseas with these programs. And I would say that, also OECD, if you look at OECD development program principles, it says, no, it's not about you planting your national flag on overseas soils. It's about looking at and helping other countries and looking at their needs. But still, many officers and Korean government, they think about carrying out overseas projects in terms of planting Korea's national flag. So again, localization need to be an important value for ODA programs. And also, oftentimes, the peer review points out that Korean ODAs lack localization. For example, we overly invite the Korean companies to participate in ODA programs. And of course, France, for example, when the French government implements their ODA programs, of course, the French companies are invited to participate. So there's no exception to that. But still, the ODA program and their success, their outcomes are measured internationally. For example, China, they have a lot of development programs, but they're not inside the scope of OECD, so they are not measured by OECD. So oftentimes. And of course, China, many of their ODA programs are about really planting their national flag on overseas soils, but that is not the approach we should take.
회장님도
Thank you, Mr. Huang. I am glad to hear that the government is also thinking about localization. I didn't know that. I thought that government ODAs were all about pursuing national interest only, but I'm glad that there is someone in the government who is thinking about localization. But the government has announced that it will increase its ODA budget, and there's a very ambitious goal. Now, I believe that these ODA projects should not be carried out by the government itself, but by civil organizations. And in doing so, we will be able to put focus more on the local needs rather than pursuing Korea's national interests. When Korean NGOs go overseas, ultimately, we are there to promote the national image, and also we hope that there will be better relations between Korea and the partner country. Of course, that's what we have in mind as well, but it's not going to be directly felt because we are civil society organizations or civil NGOs. So the government, I hope, will be able to utilize civil society organizations so that they can be in charge of executing these ODA projects while they are sponsored by the government. Thank you for your proposal and recommendation. Mr. Hwang mentioned something that the government has to pursue, definitely. In the beginning, I talked about the background behind the importance of localization. And in the past, the donor countries were the main actors, but now the partner countries, the recipient countries were the main actors. But now there's a shift again to local community members. And the key to localization is local residents. These local residents are civilians, and they include NGOs. And these civil actors, when their contribution and their roles get greater, then we can get faster in achieving the SDGs. So I believe that the more localization we achieve, the more authority and power we can give to the civil society, well, not only NGOs, but also local residents, and empower them. Then the civil sector will be able to execute more programs and projects, and that is something that we need to pursue. In Korea, we look at the OECD standard, and 15% of the budget can be spent by the civil society. That's the case of Korea. But as for Northern European countries, it's much higher, 34%, 40%. That's 15% is OECD guideline, but Korean case is only 2%. So we need to really increase the level of budget. And now moving on to good neighbors.
예, 앞서 말씀하셨듯이 정부
Well, as previous speakers talked about from the government's perspective, they also emphasize the public and private partnership. But the current government, I think, announced the biggest increase for the ODA budget. But the ratio, if you look at the ratio and overall PPP project ratio, is very limited. So again, a very limited budget for PPP programs. So it goes to show the level of perception of the Korean government about the public and private partnership. So it's a good indicator. So, but in practice, the private sector companies, as they conduct ODA projects at local site, sometimes they fail to kind of integrate into the local community. So the project itself fails as a result. So cooperation with the local community, local residents, communicating with them is very important. So a development agency or development NGOs have a lot of experiences in this way. So such development agencies need to work with the government. Then that's much more conducive to have a really positive outcome of an ODA project. I want to talk about one example. In Kenya, there's a Mewara area in Kenya. So in this area, Maasai people live there. They herd their cattle, they raise their cattle there. But drinking water and also to raise your cattle, you need water. Still, this area doesn't have any water resources. So you need to walk basically 3 hours to get some drinking water, and also to bring water to feed your cattle. And even if you secure some water, they also use the same water for human consumption and for animals. So they are exposed to waterborne disease as well. So this was a very challenging situation. But we set up local resident committee here as well. And they asked us to solve the issue of drinking water. So we worked with the CDC and the local development committee as well. And we assessed their environment, and we came to the conclusion that drinking water project is really necessary. So we decided to build a reservoir with certain capacity with specific measurement. So we built the reservoir for 2 years, and in that process, the local residents, they provided various materials and labor as well. So the local residents came here to work, and we provided technology and also administrative services as well. So this took place in around 2000, year 2000. Now 2 decades, more than 2 decades passed, but still this water reservoir is managed by the local residents there. And these facilities are still maintained and repaired by the local residents. So it's very stable management system is now in place. So given this kind of example, local resident-led project identification implementations are very important. When we do that, we can secure the success of the project as well. If you look at most of the ODA programs from the government, they give a lot of big budget. They focus on large-scale projects, but we need to think about the effectiveness and the long-lasting impact of such ODA projects. And to ensure that, we need to really work with the local government, local residents, So, and also on the ground, there are many challenges we need to deal with. And if we get more attention from the government, it's much easier to solve them. For example, even if taxation, tax treaty is signed, still there are many recipient countries that double tax the project. So that needs to be solved as well. And we could really use the government assistance in this area. And also sometimes there's a travel ban on country. But if there's a humanitarian crisis happening in their country, still the ODA project workers need to be allowed to travel to this country. But again, unless you're a government official on an official visit, you cannot enter this kind of travel ban country. If you're just an NGO worker, you are not allowed to enter. So we need to resolve that. And so we need to take more active efforts to resolve this.
저희가 이제
Thank you very much. It is time to wrap up the session. You talked about the ODA budget. Last week, it was finalized that there will be about 40% increase in the ODA budget, and this more than doubled. In the past, it was about 3 trillion won, but now it's 6 trillion won. So in just 5 years, it has more than doubled. So this has been a big issue for the international community. About 3 months ago, I went to a meeting, the international meeting on refugees, and there many participants talked to me about how Korea was able to increase its ODA budget by the 40%, because in other countries, they would maintain or lower their ODA budget because of their own refugee issues and other internal issues. But Korea was one of the few countries that was able to increase the ODA budget by a large extent. So I believe this is an opportunity, and it also poses challenges, and how we utilize this budget well is a crucial issue. And from the perspective of the SDGs, we are actually in the middle point. We have turned the halfway, so we have just 6 years left. And since last year, the international community started to think about post-SDGs. What kind of slogan, what kind of discourse we need to engage in post SDGs. So such a discussion has already started. So now is a crucial time. We're at a crossroads. And in that sense, there are two major challenges to the SDGs. One of them is the climate crisis, and the second challenge is artificial intelligence. If it goes out of control of humans, and if it becomes more intelligent, that this could be a big threat. So these two are the main threats to the implementation of the SDGs. As I mentioned, we're at an inflection point. So as those who are working for humanitarian assistance and development assistance, we have to think about how to advance these important topics going forward. And I would like to take this opportunity to the GEEF organizers for organizing this meaningful sessions. And Professor Song-in Hwan, he proposed to have the CSO session as part of GEEF 2024. And so we have been having the CSO sessions for GEEF for several years. Thank you very much. And Professor An is sitting there as well. Thank you to the organizers. I would also like to thank the 3 panel members. I know you are very busy, but thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I would also like to thank the audience for their attendance. Once again, thank you. With this, I'd like to wrap up the session.
Thank you, dear speakers, for sharing your insights into the importance of localization projects led by civil society and including them in the ODA's budgets, and also its crucial relationship to the SDGs. Do we have time for 2 more questions?
그래, 그 시간이 돼가지고
Well, time is up, so we would like to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. As we're nearing the end of day 2 of the Global Engagement Empowerment Forum, we have one more session in store for you. We have about 17 minutes to take a break, and then we will move on to Yonsei's SDG initiative, which will start at 17 hours. See you soon.